Well, hello,
Hey,
Brian Nash.
how's it going? Hi, Nancy Nash.
So I understand that you are running for US Congress.
I am. Yes. It's an exciting time for us all.
Yeah, it is an exciting time. Well, can you start off just kind of, talking about your background? Maybe some of the experiences, not so much that made you want to run for Congress, but you feel like really had an impact and shaped who you've become.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Michigan. I was born in Flint and spent most of my early years in Michigan. My dad owned a trucking company. My mom was a teacher and principal at a Catholic school. And so I had from them early on just a huge appreciation for, kind of hard work, one, but also for education. From an early age, I was kind of pushed towards doing medicine, veterinary medicine in particular, but that kind of shifted as I got older. And that was great. I went to Michigan State fully intending to go to veterinary medicine. I love animals. We have a dog, as Avi, you're aware. But what I kind of learned as I went on, I'd spent some time volunteering for a vet clinic for a number of years, and I kind of learned over time there's a lot to love about that profession, but there's some really hard stuff that's a part of it as well. And that hard stuff, putting down animals that you may not necessarily agree with the decision of the owner, was not something that I really wanted on my conscience growing up and getting older and kind of having to live with that. And so, with about a semester left, I decided to drop out of school. Ended up working retail for a while and then got a job at a bank, well, credit union first. Worked my way up through that. And, all of that experience kind of taught me a lot. It was, the good and bad of retail is always an exciting journey for anyone that's ever done it. Um, you know, Getting closed into a store at one point and then being, for because we're supposed to clean up this store even though we are not being paid for it. Wage theft issues and then having to, trying to go down the right paths to resolve it, yet not, ultimately finding out that that was a stupid idea and there's other ways to fight this sort of stuff. But I did end up going to a credit union afterwards, and that was generally a very good experience. You and I, that there were some small differences of opinion that you have with any employer, but overall, that place treated me really well. Then 2008 happened, right? And so we ended up moving out east to be closer to your family. There were more job opportunities out there. Michigan got hit especially hard with the recession. The auto industry was absolutely decimated. And so moved out east and kind of just continued that banking career. I did ultimately go back to school after a few years, finished up a finance degree, and then immediately decided to go for my MBA. And then as I got into the program, I realized like pretty quickly, like almost immediately, I could do a 2-for-1, where it was the MBA as well as a master's in business analytics. So I completed those 2 and 3 years. And the highlight of that particular trip for me was a consulting class that we took, with a number of companies. Each of us worked with an individual company, but there were a number of companies involved in Palestine. And so that gave me the opportunity to not only work with, fellow students at Bethlehem University and kind of work together to us with our business experience, them with their cultural and local experience, help this paper company, in my case, better improve their processes and improve sales. And so the ultimate part of that was actually spending time in, Israel and Palestine. The majority of the work was actually in Palestine itself, but we definitely did go through Jerusalem as well. We spent some time in Tel Aviv. We were in Israel longer than anticipated due to some travel issues that came up. But it was overall just an amazing experience. And I wrote about it. I was asked to write about it actually from my school. That article is still posted on their website to this day. It's actually on my it's on my website, I believe, and it's certainly on my link tree that's on my business cards if you see those. So you can read about my experience 10 years ago now. But a lot of the things I talk about in that article are still issues to this day. So since then, I've been working for a major financial institution, doing a number of different tech consulting projects, working to help solve issues such as employee retention and how do you get employees from one role to the next. And, they kind of all these different experiences that I've kind of been through have all been in the vein of trying to make life better for people, kind of one step at a time, right? Whether it's fighting the fight that no one else wanted to fight at the retail place I'm not going to name. They're out of business now if you really want to hunt for them, but from that sort of a thing to just kind of going and then speaking up about some of the injustices that are happening, halfway around the world, and to still just kind of come back home and try to help people who are just starting out in their careers find new ways to utilize the skills that they've learned to improve their lives for themselves, their families, and their communities. It's something that I think is really just a good way to help guide a political journey, right? And I hope that as we go along with this, people can see that, yes, I may be relatively privileged now. I'm certainly in the middle class. We're well entrenched in the middle class. But I haven't forgotten my roots. I will never forget what happened with Flint and the water supply. I will not back down from a fight and trying to make things better. So I hope that answers the question. It's lengthy, but I think that
Yes.
answers it.
You did a great job giving a very thorough background. And, your experience is really varied. And I do appreciate that you still have so much of a connection, to each of those jobs that you held, each of those decisions that you made. It seems like
Mhm.
you've really kind of maintained that empathy. And you kind of started hinting at it, but the next question I wanted to ask you was, how do you feel like that shaped your value system? Like, what values do you feel like are most prevalent for you right now?
Yeah. It was so, going back to when I was younger, right? I lived in kind of a rural part of Genesee County outside of Flint, but I went to school in downtown Flint. And, you've been there, you've seen it. I obviously know it quite well. But for the average person that might see this, they're not familiar with the area, right? And you can do one or two things with that. You can ignore it, or it can help shape you. And, yeah, I may have seen someone get shot in Flint before. Definitely happened. Friends of mine got robbed. Bad things happen, but there's wonderful people there too, trying to make a better place. And that's Flint, but that's also Michigan. That's also the Midwest. That is something that carries wherever you go, right? That's not just a one place thing. And I think that that's something that everyone has the opportunity to learn and grow and want to make things better. But not everyone's going to grasp that moment, right? And it's not, I'm not shaming anybody. I think everyone's got their story to live. And I think some people's paths are certainly more difficult than mine. And some people's are certainly easier. But I think that with the skills I have, with the voice I have, with the just kind of refusal to take shit from anybody attitude that I have, if I'm not doing something to try to make a better world, I'm kind of wasting my time. And that's just how I view it. When you grow up just kind of seeing need, you have to you pick your path early on. Do you care, or do you just look down and move on?
I appreciate that. Obviously, I'm biased. And, talking about, kind of Detroit values. You've got the Pistons jerseys behind you. So beyond the
Hmm.
reputation of the bad boys, I know that like something that's talked about all the time is that Detroit, that Michigan grit,
Hmm.
and the going to work crew and now the back to work crew.
Hmm.
Like all of that indicates, I think, kind of that attitude that you're talking about. So I know you ran for office once before. So what motivated that at the time?
Um, Trump, to be quite honest, a lot of it. I mean, it is Trump, but at the same time, I can go back to, when I went to Michigan State. I've told you this. I probably should just get this on the record at some point. But I mean, I again started going for veterinary school, but all my friends were poli sci students. I spent more time with those guys than I did with you know my colleagues in that, and that should have probably told me something then and there, is that this is important to me. And you did mention these jerseys behind me. Take a look at that one right there. Isaiah Thomas is an extremely outspoken individual when it comes to African American rights. This is something that you either pick up on, kind of entrenched in, and want to make better, or you just don't. And I never was one that was just don't. And that goes with everything I've ever done, right? If you're gonna do something, you put in the work, you put in the effort, you do your absolute best. And if you win, you win. If you lose, at least you say you tried. That's the whole process of thought when it comes to anything I do, and that includes running for office. And running for office in 2022, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely motivated by Trump. But the reality is that the whole governmental ecosystem's just kind of shitty, and there's so much that we can do. Any one particular thing, if you make it better, right, would make such a huge difference in people's lives and free them up to do other things, right? Whether it be universal health care, and I'll continue to rail on KDEM for fucking that up, 4 years ago at this point. That's a huge problem. And when you're the Democratic state and you can't get that job done, there's a lot of problems there. But going further than that, universal pre-K, helping parents, deal with early education, early opportunities to, I don't want to say get their kids out of their hair, because I think that's a really pass. You're not trying to pass off your kids, but the reality is you've got to make a living so that those kids can have a good living. And giving them a head start kills two birds with one stone, right? It allows you to go and earn the incomes that you need to live in California, which is absurdly expensive, but it also gives those kids the head start that they need so that they can live the lives that they want as well. So you could go through any number of different issues, right? You can go into fire prevention, right? This is a state that is already, I mean, we're in what, June? And we're having wildfires already. We had some 2, 3 months ago. Finding ways to help resolve those issues so that, whether it's burying power lines, whether it's, finding ways to make sure we are actually holding utilities accountable for this sort of stuff. There's so many things we can do that will just improve the quality of life one step at a time. And I am not sitting here saying in this meeting that we're going to resolve it all at once, but we can absolutely make dents in this. And over time, I do a piece of the work, someone else does a piece of the work. I pass this job off to someone else and they do 3 times the work. It's you can either do something or do nothing, and I choose to do something.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you kind of took us through some issues that you feel pretty passionate about. So what prompted you to want to run for office again and run for this office?
I can't just make things easy on myself. I'll be honest, I really wasn't thinking I was going to run again. You and I definitely have had conversations about that. Once was kind of enough. And I mean, it was honestly the internal shit that kind of pulled me away from a lot of it. It was never the wanting to help people aspect. It's the politics of politics more than anything burned me the hell out, and I'm still kind of not over that part of it. But again, it goes back to that early life fork. You do something or you do nothing. And then as soon as Trump got into office and Elon Musk started fucking everything up, um, I just couldn't not do something. And given the opportunities that are ahead of us, I I kind of felt like this is the place where it's like either go big or go home, right? I don't necessarily look at this race as being, um, I don't look at this race as being the most easy race to win in the world, but there are so many opportunities here where we can do something different. I saw you put campaign finance reform in the chat. I don't know what stays with the recording and what doesn't, but I will say this. You're right. Even though you're kind of poking to me with this one, campaign finance reform is one of those things that it hits on so many different issues that we're dealing with, right? So we can go with super PACs and the damage that's being done by, Citizens United, where someone like Elon Musk can go out and buy an election. And there's papers and there's articles out there that are being written about changes to voting machines and changes to vote tabulation totals, things like that. And those may or may not be true. I haven't seen any information that I'm assuming Max is but going back to Musk, I don't see that there's
Yeah, sorry, I'm wrestling
any
a puppy.
valid, yeah. I don't think that there's any valid information out there that says Elon definitely did this, but we definitely know he did is he gave $300 million to the Republican Party, and that's not nothing. So that's one piece of that puzzle. But then the other part of campaign finance reform and just kind of thinking about the money of politics is how are people profiting once they're in role, right? And this is something that both sides do equally. It is screwing everything up for everybody. I can blame Nancy Pelosi. I can blame top Republican leaders. They all do it. They do it consistently. They consistently beat the S&P. And that's not because they're smarter than us. That's not. That is because they have inside information that they choose to act on or that they pass off to family members that they choose to act on. And that is wrong. So those are just a couple of things that I know I've named like 6 things in this answer, but the reality is there's so much that we can do to make change, right? And none of these things, I can't promise that any one of these particular things is going to be the thing that gets across the finish line. But what I can say is I'm damn good at spinning plates, and I will put about 30 plates up in the air that we can actually make change on. And some of those plates are going to crash down, and some of those plates are going to make it where they need to go.
Sure, because it's not just up to you.
Absolutely.
The rate of
One
change.
voice out of 400 and something.
But if you did have your way, I guess like what issues would you prioritize and why?
It's twofold, just right off the top. I think anything that we can do to preserve democracy has to be kind of like at the top of the list. So for example, anything that I can do for Citizens United, anything that I can do to stop politicians from profiting off of inside information, those two need to happen right away. And the reason why those two need to happen is because bad politicians make bad policy. And the sooner we can cut off the siphon for that, the better people we're going to get in. And then the easier it is to get all those other things done. At the same time, I am well aware of the fact that just dealing with those two political issues is going to give me a so what response from a fair amount of the public. And fair, right? So for me, probably the first thing I would be looking for is universal health care. I think that everyone, every single person on this planet, every single person in this country, all of us are going to get sick someday. All of us are going to get injured someday. All of us are going to be affected by our medical system and our insurance system in a very, very profound way. And a lot of us, with the way that wages have gone recently, are just one incident away from being homeless ourselves. This is something that is just transformational. The need is there. The will of the people's actually there. And I've talked to you before about that CEO that was murdered, at the beginning of the year. And when you have a population collectively shrug or laugh about it, you know that there's a need for change. And I actually think we can get people behind it at this point. You're going to have your typical people that are saying, oh, it's socialism, blah, blah, blah. 30 other countries, major countries, already have this. Israel, who we may be going to war with in the next few days, and we fund thousands is just, that's not even remotely right. Millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to their people have universal health care. We are funding them while our people can't get cancer treatment.
That's a really interesting and powerful point.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Um, I know that, there is this attitude of some people like, well, it doesn't seem broken to me. I don't want to be paying for other people. How do you think we can help people understand, like, what are the most important mechanics kind of to understand, like, how we are actually paying for that problem that we're unwilling to solve?
Yeah, I mean, you already kind of said it. We're already paying for it, right? Our anytime you and I go to the doctor, anytime you deal with insurance, you are paying for people who aren't paying for insurance or aren't paying for their medical treatments. And that comes down to any time that someone's a non-payer, everyone else's costs go up. And so whether you like it or not, unless you just completely just dismiss the healthcare system entirely, dismiss doctors entirely, you are paying for someone else's healthcare. Insurance is our whole insurance system is based on what's essentially a Ponzi scheme, right? The insurance is not our healthcare. Our doctors and our physician's assistants and our nurses, those are the people that are providing care. The insurance industry is simply saying, we want to be the deciders as to whether you get to go have a procedure done or not. And you want to do it yourself, too bad, you have to go through us. And that's not an acceptable. If you did this for anything else in life, if I wanted to go out and take you out to a restaurant and go get tacos, right? And we had to go through the taco police first, to decide whether or not we can go and get tacos and also pay them a fee for them to decide that, we'd laugh in their face. But we've somehow been conditioned into this system that says you work for an employer, your employer provides you insurance, your insurance tells you yes or no on whether or not you can get care, and then you see your doctor. And that is so backwards, I don't even know where to start. So, yeah,
All
I don't
right,
want
I
to get off and
appreciate
rant.
you diving into that. Diving into another topic that I know is really important to you. Can you talk about if you're like, I need to look into this more, I totally get that, but
Sure.
can you talk about, the present problems in education and kind of like, the pick a path adventure you sort of see we could take positive and negative from this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard line, and there's a lot of different angles we could take this from, right? So, I mean, we could talk about early education, we could talk about career pathing and education. And maybe that's the angle we take for today, right? So as it stands right now, your options for education are to go through public school or some sort of private institution or homeschooling. And then you would get to either decide whether to go to college or choose not to go to college and find your own path, right? And so the choice that people are left with now is often leads to better financial outcomes, but is becoming so absurdly expensive that the average person can't necessarily make that work. And we have family members that are kind of going through and making those decisions right now. And that's unfortunate because I don't think that you should be gate kept from a career that you may be amazing at because of money. At the end of the day, aren't we all better off if the best people become the best scientists, become the best whatever it may be, right? And get that. But there's a subsect of those people that may never get that opportunity simply because of the fact that money is a factor. Now, the other side of it is we have kind of, as a society, dumped on manual labor type jobs, construction, the trades, those sorts of things for a long time. And so we now have a problem where most of the people in these industries are kind of, if they're not aging out, they're getting closer to it. And so we need people that are willing to go do those jobs and, in theory, make a lot of money on those. But we need to make sure that they have the tools that they need to be successful, right? Proper trade schools, making sure that they have apprenticeships, things like that. These are all things that we should be investing in so that all of our kids have the opportunity to be successful. This generation that's coming up right now is one of the first that's going to do worse financially than their parents, and that is, quite frankly, on all of us adults. There's no excuse that our kids should be doing more poorly than us, other than pure greed and lack of planning, and we can change that.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's worth sharing, keeping it anonymous, but that, we have a close connection with, someone that's 19 that is trying to figure out, like, can they actually get to the next level of apprenticeship? Like, is that even
Yep.
available for them? Or should they just completely switch paths and now, leave the technical school that they're kind of paying as they go, which is great,
Mhm.
and go to a much more expensive college where they're going to have to take out student loans. This person is going to have to find a co-signer because their parents aren't able to do that. And there's just so many barriers for people that
Yep.
age, and facing that decision of like going into serious debt at such a young age. I think that, it's not completely foreign to me, but it's not one that I want to see the next generation deal with.
Well, and the part that's so hard about that too is, at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society where we are choosing to spend an absurd amount of money on some type of education, right? Again, whether it be college or some sort of trade school or something else, or you're just foregoing that potential income to do apprenticeships, things of that nature, right? And you have a billionaire class that is just making money hand over fist off of our investments and doing the absolute bare minimum to pay us back for them. Wages, and this goes into the wage conversation, right? Wages have been basically stagnant for decades, while the prices of everything have gone up exponentially. You and I talked about housing the other day, but that's true of food, it's true of clothing, it's true of literally everything that we may buy, whether it's absolute necessity or just something that we want to enjoy as part of the human experience. None of it is affordable anymore. And that is not because we have failed to do our job. People are more efficient at their jobs today than they ever have been. They are working longer hours than they ever have been. We have created this hustle culture, which is basically normalizing an absurd number of hours. And instead of getting ahead, we're all falling farther and farther behind, while the 1% is taking a larger and larger percent of all money that is made in this country. And that's not fair.
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point, and it has to be a mind shift too, I think, because just like you were talking about before, being asked to work overtime hours that you're not getting paid for,
Mhm.
when that becomes the norm and you're a person that's like, I'm a hard worker, I care, I need to show my employer that I care, you can feel like you're not faced with a choice. And that's not fair.
Right. And this is something where people need to know their value too, right?
Hmm.
We talked a little bit earlier, Detroit, land of grit, everyone works hard. That's fine, but also you have to recognize as an individual that you have value, and to sit here and be just beat down to a point where you can't you go to work, you eat dinner, you go to sleep, and rinse and repeat can't be the norm. And I'll just say this too, because just before we hopped on here, I saw a truth from Donald Trump today. So today's Juneteenth. It's the newest federal holiday. It is the day that talks about that celebrates the emancipation of African Americans, from slavery. And wonderful day, should have been done a long time ago, but we have it for 5 years. And I've seen multiple things that have kind of been from the right saying, oh, I'm just ignoring this. Turning Point USA, we're not celebrating this holiday. Everyone's coming in here to work. But what I saw Donald Trump say, and I actually want to pull this up. I'm going to pull this up real quick just so I can quote it so that I'm not misspeaking in any way, because I think this is dangerous. Um, so I'm just going to show it real quick. Okay. So I'm going to show this. Too many non-working holidays in America. It is costing our country billions of dollars to keep all of these businesses closed. The workers don't want it either. Soon we'll end up having a holiday for every once working day of the year. Good job, Donald Trump. You're a fucking idiot. It must change if we are going to make America great again. So you got
Wow.
a cult leader telling his 70 billion followers, or million followers, not billion, 70 million followers, hey, guess what? I'd rather you not take federal holidays. What do you think the people in Flint back in the 1930s were fighting with the unions over? Federal holidays, workers' rights, making sure that people have the right to live in a reasonable way. There's so many aspects to this that are just completely jacked up. And you've got southern states, Florida. I don't quote me on this off the top of my head because I can't recall which one is offhand. But you've got states that are pushing for children to be able to work more hours with less pay. You are in a situation where union membership has decreased, and the need for unions could not be more than what it is right now, because there is an assault happening from the top on our workers. This is not just an attack. This is a full-out assault, and we need change.
I mean, I completely believe you're right. And I appreciate you bringing that up just because I did not see that today.
I
It's,
saw it when you were out walking Max, is the honest
yeah,
truth.
that's
So
appalling.
it's
And
disgusting.
I'm reading 1984, and the first thing that came to mind is freedom is slavery, just
Yep.
convincing people.
It's
And
almost like they've decided that that book is their playbook in
yeah.
some ways, which is
Well,
scary.
and earlier you were talking about, looking at other countries to model other possibilities for healthcare too.
Mhm.
And as I've learned too, there are a lot of other models for how we can actually approach that work-life balance. And I can be as guilty as anyone of just, constantly sort of feeling like I should be working, whether I was working for myself or an employer, but actually telling people that, they have no right to time off, they have no right to celebrate things, that's really damaging.
It's really gross. And the fact that it's happening to this particular holiday for the reasons it's happening makes it doubly gross. The racism aspect to it, everything that goes along with it. It's because it's not just an attack on one thing. It is this multifaceted attack on decency at the end of the day, right? Because it is the right to spend time with your family. It is the right, and I mean, again, this is a federal holiday. Not everyone gets it off, but there's a number of people that do. I'm fortunate enough to be one that does. But it gives people a chance to spend time with their family, with their loved ones, reflect on something that was truly terrible and the good that has come from it. It gives you the opportunity to think about what the next steps are to make a more equal and just society. But the fact of the matter is, if you're sitting on an assembly line, or if you're sitting in a field, or if you're sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours working for the man, you sure as hell aren't figuring out how to make a better world, which is not what they want.
I completely agree with you. And this gives me actually a good transition to what I wanted to ask you, which we've kind of been talking back
Hey,
and forth
Max.
about it. Yeah, Max is making his presence known. But, it's complicated, and I understand that you don't have all the answers, but how do you think we approach solving the wage issue? Because my basic understanding of inflation is like, well, if you raise the wages, this is also going to inflate the price of everything else, which is really complicated. And I
Right.
know that it's not just linear like that, but how do you think we kind of, solve this inequity?
I mean, there's a number of different things you can do to look at this sort of thing. You could, I'm sure there's certain antitrust things that we can start looking into to try to start to resolve some of this. Most of the food that we eat comes from a handful of companies, right? The clothes that we buy comes from a handful of companies. The number of stores that we're buying from at this point is starting to go down to a handful of companies. Hi, Amazon. Everything that we do. I mean, even this idea of entertainment, right? Netflix, Amazon Prime. You used to have one cable bill and you'd pay 60, 80, whatever number of dollars a month. But now these services, in the name of choice, have got you paying way more money for a crappier service. And that's one example of this, right? But the reality is that dealing with it at the corporate level is one piece of the puzzle. I mean, when you talk about wages, I mean, you still have to deal with the wage gap between men and women, right? And when you're talking about the wage gap, you need to talk about white males versus everybody else. So I mean, it's so multifaceted. I mean, this is one of those things, quite frankly, I want to talk with other economists about and get other opinions. I have certain thoughts, and I think this is probably the type of thing that's worth a deep dive, to be entirely honest. But I think this is something that it's an ever evolving issue, but I think that it needs to be attacked from a couple different fronts. But you can create legislation, for example, that would cap profits, and anything above and beyond that goes to the workers, for example, right? It's not saying you can't succeed. It's not saying you can't make a good living for yourself, your family, have at it, right? But when you're doing so, in the case of a Walmart or McDonald's, or surely Amazon, where you have half your workforce getting government assistance, something's wrong in your business practices, and it starts at the CEO level. Because we are paying for those employees as part of this process. And the Republicans want to do away with those safety nets with no sort of backup for these individuals, because they want their billionaire buddies to get tax breaks. And quite frankly, I don't know that the Democrats are really all that different. But you can't have it that way, right? You can't just have a servant class, kick them on the streets, and expect them to be there to do our bidding. They need to be treated with respect and be able to, we've got a friend, Laurel, who talks a lot about making sure that these lower level workers can live in the communities that they serve. And you have to be able to and this is not just a federal thing, right? This is working with states and municipalities, counties, to find new and creative ways, because so much is changing, so much is going to change. The advent of AI is going to make everything even more complicated. Um, so the conversation that we would have today or next week or next month has some similarities to the conversation you're going to see 3 to 5 years from now, but in some ways it's going to be an entirely different world. So this is a conversation I'd love to do a deep dive on, but even that deep dive is going to change quickly.
I can appreciate that. But I think that's a good point, because I do think understanding economics is not easy,
Mhm.
but even if you can give people an overview of like how we got where we are right now, and help, learn some history, like lessons from the past that maybe we could use creating solutions for the future, I think that would be really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, to me, and I mean, part of this is because I'm a child of the 80s, but a big part of it for me, it starts with Reagan and this whole idea of trickle down economics. It was bullshit from the very start. I was I was not even 10 years old when he was out of office, and I knew that was nonsense from the moment it started. All you have to do is ask a simple question. If you give someone money, are they going to give it away? And I mean, the answer to that is yeah, to a degree. They're gonna do the things that they need to do to survive, or they're going to need to do the thing, or they're going to do the things that help their businesses thrive more so they can make more money. And yeah, that might help people to a degree, but it's never going to trickle down equitably. This is why the wealth gap has gotten so goddamn out of control over the past 40 years.
And you know me, I'm an optimist. I always believe in people's capacity to change, but you are relying on the heart set and the mindset of people rather than a formal structure where equity is preserved.
Sure. And I think there are people that are trying, right? Mark Cuban and what he's doing to try to help lower prescription drug costs is trying. I'm not going to say he couldn't do more because obviously he could, but I think that there's at least an effort being put in there. But the reality is that the system is broken, and in order for us to get to where we want to go as a people, and with 330 plus million different ideas of what that means, it's a complicated mess. But there's a lot of change that needs to happen for any of us to see some further success.
Yes, and that's an example that gives me hope that, there are people with money that do have a conscience, but
Yeah,
unfortunately,
and
that's not everyone.
no, it's not everyone. And I'll call Cuban out just because of the fact that I'm a basketball fan. He's an IU grad like me. So there's reasons
Hmm.
to kind of show him to be in a positive light. But I'm also not going to deny that there's more he can do.
Hmm.
It's not like he can take it with him when he's gone.
Hmm.
So
Sure, but it's
hopefully he
also
continues.
it's a private effort. It
Yeah.
also gives me hope too that outside, just in politics, there
Mhm.
are things that we can do privately to help solve some of the issues
Absolutely.
that we
But the
have.
heart has to be in the right place, like
Right,
you said.
right. And you talked about Laurel, who, I also greatly believe in, and her ideas about housing. Can you talk a little bit more about, the problem with housing in California and maybe how that is different in some ways, if you feel like it is, than the larger housing problem that we have in the country, and then kind of, talk about, at least to some extent, how you see we could go about solving it.
Yeah. So let me just take a drink of water real quick.
That's important. I know I've been stealing water on the mute.
Mhm. It's warm up here too. So,
Yeah.
um, so uh, housing in California, what's the best way to describe this? There are some differences here and elsewhere. Let me start by saying this. Housing is a problem throughout the United States at this point. It doesn't matter if you are in California. It doesn't matter if you're in Florida. It doesn't matter if you're in the Northeast. It doesn't matter if you're in the South. It doesn't matter. Housing is extremely expensive. Um, so I'm going to start with that part of it. Let's talk about it, and then I'll get into a little bit of the nuance about California because there is a little bit of nuance I can easily talk to. But part of what is making housing so challenging is corporate interests buying up housing left and right. And so you end up in a situation where, and I mean, we benefited from this. So let's be real transparent about this because we didn't know, I didn't know at the time, but we didn't know it was up, but we benefited from this. So just to tell the full story, because I was the one that made the call initially. Um, we were in our house in Sacramento. We saw that Zillow had, I kind of keep track of our house price just because I'm curious. I'm kind of a data nerd like that. And so one of the things that Zillow was doing was putting in a program where they would buy your house. You'd get to forego the process of, um, going through the sales process, the commissions and everything that has to go as part of that. And you would get a check. You could then use that check to go buy in our place. And so we were in a starter home in the Sacramento area, and we got an offer for our house, which we paid 312 for a couple years prior, and they gave us an offer of 515,000 for it. You know, the comp on this house was somewhere in the 400 range, so the low 400s, like 410 maybe. So this was almost $100,000 more or less more than what we were expecting. And for anybody that is nothing to sneeze at and something that you should probably take. And we did, and that was enough to get us down here to Murrieta. And Zillow made the news for this program because their algorithms were jacked up. They didn't implement the program properly. And long story short, they shut it down in the midst of us buying our house, but because we're already under contract, they had to go through with it. So they lost money on our house in the short term. What they do get to do with this, I know for a fact that our house is now being rented out. Um, it took a while for them to get someone to rent it. They tried to resell it at some point. Someone is currently living there though. So they now have any future price appreciation for that house that goes on. They are also a big enough entity, and if someone else purchased it, it's not Zillow at this point, but just for sake of the conversation, we're going to act like it is. So I want to be real transparent. Someone else is now owning it. It's another corporation. I don't know exactly who it is off the top of my head. So just for argument's sake, we're going to still say it's Zillow. The point is, they now have this property. They have a property that's been sitting in not being used for at least a year. And Sacramento has a huge homeless problem. There are people that can't afford to buy a house. There are people that can't afford to rent a house. And so take this particular house and multiply this by hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands, where you have similar people, and probably not with the same type of gap in value that we did, but grandma and grandpa decided to downsize their house, and a private equity firm decided to buy it up. Same thing happens, right? It takes some time to rent it out. The house sits unused for a period of time. And you end up in a situation where these corporations are continuing to spike up prices of housing. Well, let's talk interest rates for a quick second here. This is such a complicated subject, right? So typically with interest rates, as interest rates rise, prices fall. And the opposite is true. It's a seesaw. So as interest rates fall, prices tend to rise. That way you have some kind of equity. The pricing kind of stays in line with each other. But what happens when you come out of COVID and your prices stay high and your interest rates stay high and nothing changes, this slowly moves up and this stubbornly kind of stays like it is. You have this incredibly difficult spot where, as corporations buy this houses up, they're the only ones that can afford them right now. So they have built this out where they're slowly sucking up all the options that are out there. And then the rest of us are kind of left with the scraps and not able to move. People that are trying to get out of renting situations can't afford a 7.5% interest rate and an 800 plus thousand dollar house, right? We were making good money, and our house was 300,000 at the time. The average, I saw a stat here in Riverside County. I'm sure it's similar elsewhere. For a condo in Riverside County, your income at this point needs to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000. That's a condo. That is not a full house with land and space. That is a condo. It's a closet. And so I guess I say all that to say this. Housing is absurdly complicated, but it really kind of comes down to two things. It comes down to greed, and it comes down to some of the complications that make California unique. And I do want to make sure I hit that real quick. Yeah, there are a number of things you can point to in California that could be done better to help the situation. Um, One of the things that I'm aware of is that, in some of the major cities, you can't have houses over a certain height, duplexes are a difficult thing to get through. A lot of it is designed that way to benefit the rich from the perspective of, hey, we like our really pretty coastline with little houses here and there. But at the same time, the downside of that is, thank you, Max. The downside of that is, you have people who are not able to find places to live. And there's so much more that can go into this conversation. I said the same thing about the last one, but it's true. There are regulations that could be updated, could be changed. This isn't necessarily it's not really the scope of this role for California specifically. I think my place would be more to kind of guide the overall housing conversation, talking about land grant usage, things like that, where you actually can start to make some traction in these sorts of things throughout the country. But California has a series of its own issues that, had I won that state Senate race, that's where I would have been digging more into this, because that's really where this would have been supremely effective. And so this also, I'll say this as kind of a rubber stamp on this part of the conversation. This is why all of your political races are important, not just the House of Representatives, not just the US Senate, not just the governor. You need to know who your state senators are. You need to know who your assembly members are, because they're the ones that are making these decisions. And then that goes down to city council and all those other things. Know who these people are working for and make sure it's for you, because you can complain all you want about the problems in our country, but if you aren't doing your job and voting for the people that are trying to help you, you're a part of the problem as well. So it's on all of us to make change.
I agree with you. School
That's
board,
a lot.
water board, that's okay. Yeah, it's all important for sure. And I think this is something where I would love a deep dive too,
I
just
would love to.
on,
And I actually think Laurel would be a good one to have with this. And I know we've talked to her about that.
because,
I've talked to
yeah,
her about
because
that in
she
the
would ask
past.
you some tough questions and
Mhm.
it would be good for you.
Well, I'd also ask her for her advice too,
Yeah,
because again, I'm not a secret, but no politician's perfect. No political candidate's perfect. None of us have all the answers. And the ones that tell you that they do are fucking lying to you.
definitely full of shit. Yeah, right. You cannot be an expert on everything. I think
Yeah.
that's a really important component of this is
What
bringing in
should
people.
be important for a politician is having a good BS meter. Know who's on your side, know who's not on your side, be able to discern one from the other, and not just be like Trump, where if you flatter me, you get whatever the fuck you want. Flattery doesn't work with me. It doesn't work with me. I do not care. And people have kind of found that out over the past few years. I'm going to do the right thing regardless.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to, and energy to talk about a wide variety of topics. So I'm sorry I'm being interrupted, but
Someone's
I,
clearly ready for
yeah,
dinner.
well, yeah, but I wanted to ask you a wrap up question. I
Sure.
wanted to ask you, what you think it's most important kind of, that we're focusing our time and energy on right now, what you're going to be focusing your time and energy on this summer.
Can we try that question one more time? Just because I don't know if you know this, but we have a very upset puppy in the background.
Yes, he's very needy. Yeah, I was just wondering, what you think it's most important for people to really focus their time and energy on right now, because we've talked about a lot of different topics. And
Mhm.
then for you personally, in this role running for candidacy, what are you going to be focusing your time and energy on this summer?
Yeah, so I think for the average person, educate yourself on the candidates that are already out there. Ask them questions, right? And whether it's me, whether it's any of the other candidates in this race, if you're in CA 41, you have even more people you need to talk to because I think there's like what 34 people running for that seat at this point. You know, I think, but there's truth to that though, right? Like you, if you want to make a good decision, you have to put the time in. I will say this, I have gone out of my way from day one on this to be clear and transparent about how I think, how I operate. And if you go to briannash.com, I have got writings on everything I can think of at this point. And I am more than happy to do more. So, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, I think that that is the best thing that you can do is come to an event like this. I'm glad we were able to kind of do this as an intro one tonight. I will take every future one that we do, and we're going to do more of these. Some of them may be deep dives on a particular thing. Some of them may be Q&A. Some of them may be a mix. We will figure out what the right cadence is for this over time. But I'm going to make myself available constantly because that is the only way to make good choices. As far as what I'm going to do, um, try to meet people. I mean, that's literally the best I can do with this is get my name out there, get my beliefs out there. Some of that is certainly social media, but certainly some of that is going to be events and things like that as well. There is an event coming up this Saturday in Fallbrook as of the time of this recording. I'm not sure I'll get this out beforehand before we get to that, but we'll see. But there's going to be more of those opportunities that come up. I'll certainly go to the Democrat clubs. I know Indivisible's having a couple events in the next month that aren't rallies, but they're just kind of get-togethers, and I plan on attending to those. I will continue to hit the various rallies that are going on. I know there's one scheduled for like June 7th, July 17th. I think there's even one scheduled for July 4th that I've seen. It's a smaller one. So we'll see about that. But yeah, my biggest goal right now is just to kind of get out and talk to people and get my name out there, meet people, understand where y'all are at as well, because I can see the big picture, right? I think I have a solid grasp of kind of the macro view of what everything looks like that affects the average person. But what I can't do is put a name to a face to a problem yet. And that only comes from actually meeting anyone that wants to talk. And I don't give a shit if you're a Democrat or Republican, an independent, someone that hasn't voted in 20 years. Um, the truth of the matter is that I'm willing to talk to anybody. I'm not necessarily going to agree with everybody. That's clearly not true. But at the same time, I can find some way in which I can make your life a little bit better. And that is the best that any politician should ever be able to tell you is that they can find one thing that'll make your life a little bit easier. So that's my goal going forward.
Well, in my view, that authenticity, that willingness to engage in conversation, is one of the most important things that I look for in a candidate. So, but yeah, thank you so much for taking time and energy to
Dude, thanks for
talk
helping
about
me
some
out.
really
Like this was not the
important
expectation for
issues.
tonight, but
Yeah.
you did awesome. So just final thing for this recording. So I'm going to say this, and it's entirely true. So we went into this not having any plan whatsoever. Everything I said in my emails and in my social media posts was exactly the truth. The intent was this for to be a Q&A, and bring your questions, and I was going to do that. Nancy, who is my wife, is also a podcast host, and she does this for a series of it's an entrepreneurship based podcast. And so she has the benefit of talking to people all around the world who are in the midst of a startup journey, um, and kind of goes through that. And so I say that to say this: we had no expectation of where this conversation was going to go tonight. We talk all the time because we're married and we love each other. But at the same time, you, Nancy, did an amazing job just because this is what you do, right? And so I thank you for kind of rolling with the punches and giving me some damn good questions, because you were not prompted in this at all and you killed it. So thanks.
Well, thanks. I was just gonna pretend that this was like a scheduled interview that we had done.
No.
And I think it's valuable though, for
I
people to get to ask you their questions. And
Mhm,
I've got some ideas on, how we could promote this in the future. But I
mhm,
definitely think that I do hope you release this. I hope that it helps some people get a better feeling for, who you are, how thoroughly you research certain topics,
mhm,
where they might want to ask questions or help you become stronger around certain topics, because there's room for growth too.
100%.
But yeah, this is a great exercise. So,
But I think the reason I'm saying that is
mhm,
because I think it's important to know the type of people that you're working with. And it's not
mhm,
just me, it's you as well. I
mhm,
mean, if I do happen to win, excuse me, if I do happen to win this thing, I mean, it affects you as well, right?
mhm,
And so it's nice to know that I am working with someone in you that is very smart, very intelligent,
mhm,
very well versed on your own, and we're able to pivot and we're able to think differently about
mhm,
something,
mhm.
because that's something that people
Definitely.
struggle with. I think
Yeah.
politicians oftentimes struggle with, kind of just going off the cuff and doing something, making
Hmm.
something out of nothing.
Right.
Right. And I think that you helped me do that tonight. And I thank you for that. And
Yeah,
I
of
think it also
course.
shows that I'm kind of able to, think off the cuff and just kind of talk about the issues
Yes.
in a way that is, it's intelligent. It talks about things with the urgency that it requires.
Hmm.
And we care. That's the biggest piece
Hmm.
of the puzzle.
Yes. Yeah. It came across as very authentic, and I know that it is. And
Mhm.
hopefully other people realize that too.
Yeah.
So,
So
all
thank
right.
you.
Well, to anyone listening, we hope that you have a great day or evening ahead, depending on when you're listening to this. And please join us for the next one.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good
All
night.
right. Bye.